We're back at it again. We're in Microsoft Paint, probably the best program ever to come to Windows. And we're going to talk about defaulting and what exactly is a default and how you can run it. Now, let me turn my fan on. It is hot as hell in here. I apologize for the background noise, but I don't think I can do it, boys. Now, the thing with defaulting is there are many ways to play it, but, obviously it's called a default. And there are ways you can play defaults, like obviously, let's lean A on this default, which basically means you have most of your players towards A with maybe one watching C flank or a wire down on C flank. And there's obviously, lean C or put a lot of presence mid. Those are just different ways you can play a default. And a default is basically just holding positions, waiting for the enemy player to overextend so they get picked. We're talking about this mainly on the attacker side, because a default setup on CT is very simple. Obviously, you have about 2 players here. We're going to use black dots for the defenders. So 2 players here. Obviously one may be pushing up short, and then once he has short control, if he decides to get it, this player can then rotate out. And then you have 1 towards B, preferably Sage, so he can solo this and wall this off. You have 1 in window, preferably somebody with a lot of utility, like a Raze, so he can throw nades down this doorway, whatnot. And then you have 1 on C. Obviously, his main sight line is going to be down into C long. So this is kind of a default setup for the counter-terrorists or the defending side. Now, for attackers, we're going to use red. A standard default would look something like this. You have 1 player holding outside of garden. You have somebody holding C. Potentially, you don't always have to have either of these. As long as you have wires, it can be fine. And the big point about wires is to obviously shut down those main flanks so you can draw more attention away from these 2 flanks. That way you don't have to have 2 players playing out here. You guys can then move as more of a cohesive unit, and you can have 5 players down this area, like maybe 1 or 2 in window, and then a couple around here. Obviously just putting a lot of presence mid and trying to bait out utility, draw rotates. The Cypher obviously needs to be very on top of his game if he's doing this, and he needs to be ready to call out and let his team know if somebody has flanked through. Now, I don't like doing this personally, but with the use of wires, you can do this. Without wires, I would never recommend this. If you don't have tripwires down in C, do not do this. If you don't have tripwires down in A, do not do this. If you don't have a Cypher, you need somebody watching these until you guys decide what you want to do. Now, so without the wires, we're going to use that. You have maybe 1 towards window, 1 playing in grass here, and maybe 1 playing like right around here watching the garage push. Well, this player kind of assists mid window. This is kind of a default for the most part for the attacking side. It's not perfect, but this is one of the ways people like to run a default setup. Now, the reason for running this is you're covering everything, right? You have control of this whole area of the map. Now, there's obviously no man's land, and no man's land is kind of let's see, no man's land is kind of this, like this area here. I'm going to use no man's land. I'm going to circle it in yellow. So no man's land would be areas like this. That is not what I wanted to do. Where's my brush? So no man's land is something like this. Shit you got to fight tooth and nail to actually get. Obviously, it's pretty easy for either side to take if it's played properly. It's a little bit harder for defenders to take, but if the attackers wanted to take it, it's fairly simple for them. All they have to do is, get through this cross choke point right here and kill the player potentially short. So this is kind of no man's land, and this is as well. To get control, it's going to be very contested. Obviously, you have the bomb sites, which comes down to the same principle, but these are areas you can kind of give up. Not as much C long as, like A short and A lobby. But no man's land is that area that once taken, the attackers then have control of that area. So starting off, the attackers will have control of all of this almost every single time, right? They will have all of this controlled. And then slowly but surely, they expand their map control. By taking a lobby, you now have access to a short, so your map control kind of goes like this instead of, just the smaller area. You are working map control, you are gaining map control slowly. If you have a smoke down and you get a player into cubby, you can have control of this too. So then it expands even more. And if you get garage control, then it gets bigger and bigger. Y'all can see what I'm trying to fucking say here. It's pretty damn simple. The goal of defaulting is to gain map control or get a pick. Now, gaining map control can be very dangerous if it's a very close game, but gaining map control is still very important. So if you gain this area, you can then wait here and you can draw out utilities, potentially draw out a rotate because you have this area. The enemy team doesn't know if you're in here or not. And if they start hearing footsteps, they might draw a rotate over from B site. Now, once you have gained control of this no man's land, you potentially can draw a rotator over. Now, given usually if there's two people here, rotates won't come very quick. But if it's a player soloing, they will almost definitely rotate if you gain control of no man's land. So let's say there's nobody playing here, right? And you have two players setting up towards C because they've been putting a lot of aggression on C. So you have one in doorway, one in window, one on C site. And this is a very C heavy default from the defending side. So once it's called, right, that there are people A site. Let me get rid of this this fucker over here. Oh my god, I just broke the map. So once it's called, there are people near A site. One of these two players, because there's so much presence here, will then rotate out and take this position here. And this player will just cover where he left. So it's just a big mind game, right? It's drawing rotates, moving the defenders around, and forcing them to react to what you're doing at the same time. Now, once you have this default, once you have this, it's very important that if you end up getting a pick, I talked about this in the last video, if you end up getting a pick, say you kill the player on C site, this player then has to react. I know it's getting very jumbled, but just bear with me. And this player has to watch here. So this player has to come into C site and watch the C site push while this player plays window. Or, you know, he just backs up to CT and covers C from there while this player stays in here. Either one works, right? You are moving the players around. If you get that pick, you are thinning their defenses. Now, once you get a pick, it's very important that you decide whether or not you want to push off of this pick or if you want to just wait for their players to shift around, and then you can try and draw a rotate. Because if you still have people in here and you get a pick towards C site, obviously that's going to scare them. And then you can start making noise towards A site, you know, a couple pairs of footsteps, and then try and draw a rotate over. That way there's less people on C, where your team is like grouped up C or something. There's less people on C then, and you guys can just execute straight off that. And executing would just be pushing straight into site. You get all your players grouped up over here, and you guys hit it, hoping that their defenses are a bit more thin on that site, and that the rotates are headed towards A site due to the noise and the commotion that you caused over on A site. You scared the shit out of them. Hopefully they rotated, and you guys hit based off that. So what I'm trying to get at here, the main goal of setting up defaults is to gain all of this map control and not lose any map control or lose any map presence. And then once you guys decide on what you want to do based on the map control and that you have at the moment and based on what they've been doing at other sites, you guys can then group up and push in. That's why a mid-heavy push is so good, because you are all there, you are all unified, you are ready to go no matter what happens. So if a player pushes through C, a couple of you could turn around just to deal with him, and then you've potentially gotten a free pick. So gaining map control is very important. And playing defaults is also very important. It's important that you aren't playing the game and you are simply just giving up all the map control that you have, right? Because when you start off, you have so much area. You have so much area that you can abuse. You have all of this, right? If you give this up, that gives all these defenders, you know, this guy can push in through here. The window guy can push in through here. And this guy can push in through here, right? There's three different players that could push in. If they coordinate a push down here, you know, there's two players behind you. If you want to back out, you cannot. That's why playing defaults is very important. If you guys get shut down on this rush, all five of you push in towards long and short, and Brimstone's like, yeah, fuck you guys. He throws a smoke down here, throws a smoke down here, and you guys don't want to push through that smoke. What do? Are you just going to wait there and let them push in behind you and just basically gain control of all of this? Because that's what happens when you give up map control. You give them everything except for the area where you are present. So if you want to back out, you cannot. And that's the big problem that I see a lot. People will give up map control for absolutely no reason, and they'll say, let's hit A. When that doesn't work out and they like lose one or two players, they have essentially lost the round because they've lost the map. So that's all I wanted to talk about. Sorry if it was a bit confusing, but I tried explaining it to the best of my ability. So y'all have a good day.